Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Mindful Constitution podcast. I'm super excited today to be chatting with the one and only Victoria Vanstone, Vic, as
Hello.
he goes by, author of A Thousand Wasted Sundays, which, if you have not read, is hilarious and I highly recommend. She also is a podcast host of the Sober Awkward podcast, and she is a mom of two, right?
Three.
Three. Okay.
Yeah, I had a baby in my sobriety, which was lovely at 43. So yeah, three. It's a lot. It's relentless, but it's lovely sometimes.
Yeah, three is like rare these days.
Yeah, it's a lot.
I know. I heard someone say once, one kid is one kid, two kids is like 10 kids, and three kids is like 500 kids.
Yeah, it does feel a bit like that some days. I mean, I've just dropped them off at school, so the house is empty, and so we're good to go because otherwise it's just chaos all around me all the time. So, although I do have a sleeping dog next to me on the floor here, my little Sandy, she's keeping me company when the kids aren't here. But yes, having three kids, I mean, I've got a second book coming out called Mumming in April, just before Mother's Day. Yeah,
What?
so there's some news. I haven't really told a lot of people yet, but that's coming out. And it's all about me having three children, never expecting it, but the ups and downs of motherhood and how we are allowed to hate it sometimes, and that's okay. And it's about me trying and failing to be a better parent, even in my sobriety, because of course it's not all rainbows and unicorns. Sometimes sobriety is tough too. So, yeah, the challenges of motherhood all in one comedy book. So I'll let you know when that's out.
Oh my God, that's so exciting. I love to hear that. I had no idea.
Yeah, it's so
And I'm,
exciting. Believe it
I'm,
either, quite honestly.
yeah,
Weird
yeah,
things
I know.
happen.
I'm like,
Drinking, I tell you.
yeah. Oh my gosh, I know. So it's like this rare moment of peace and quiet for you over there.
Totally, it is. Yeah, it's lovely. It's nice to be here chatting with you, all the way over in America. I'm in Australia. It's bloody miles away. We couldn't be here nearly further apart, could we? But
I
here we are,
know.
same room. Isn't it amazing?
It is amazing. I know we were just chatting before we hopped on about how I have her book, and she was saying, like, and it's hard to get here.
Yeah.
Vic was saying that she is going to have it perhaps on her website soon.
Yes. Hopefully, this by the end of next week, I'll have some copies on the website, so it'll be easier to get hold of. But the postage from Australia to America is a pain in the ass, but yeah, it's good enough. Let's say it's good enough to pay the postage. It's about probably the same as a bottle of wine. So if you look at it that way, then you're investing your money rather than wasting it on boozing. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And did you, for having your third baby at
Yes.
43, were you planning to do that or did it happen?
No, I actually had a miscarriage after the second one. I wasn't expecting to be pregnant, and then I had kind of had my head round having a third baby and was like, okay, I think we can do this now. So we just gave it another go, and yeah, having him when I was 43 has just been the most lovely thing because their childhoods are going on a lot longer. Like I've still got a little one, even though I'm nearly 50, which is lovely. It's a bit awkward at the school gates because everyone else is about 25. And I can't, get up off my knees. So, so yeah, no, but it is lovely, and it's lovely to be 100% sober for him. I mean, my first daughter, I gave up
No.
drinking 6 weeks after she was born. Yeah, Nell. So none of my kids will remember me as a drinker, which is a real benefit because it's one of the most common emails I get actually, is from women who have drank throughout their children's childhoods, and there's a lot of guilt and shame that obviously runs alongside that. And it's also one of the reasons people start drinking again if they've given up, because they feel so awful that they've had to, spend their entire children's lives reaching for a drink every time they're annoyed, when they feel strong emotions. And it's quite sad to hear that, people do carry a lot of guilt, but it's not really anyone's fault. I mean, we'll get into all that a bit later on in the podcast, I'm sure. But like drinking alcohol is just something that happens to most of us. And taking the guilt and shame out of it is really one of the ways that people will be able to move on from it rather
Right.
than kind of get stuck within it. So, yeah. I speak to a lot of mums who carry around lots of guilt about drinking through their child's childhood, but actually, it's not anyone's fault, and there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and you can get through that. And I think there's nothing more empowering than somebody overcoming adversity, which is what it is as a parent, becoming a stronger role model and giving up alcohol forever. I think it's almost a stronger message than never drinking, actually. So I think there is a positive
Yeah.
side to give up later in your children's lives so they can see what a bloody warrior you are rather than just being stuck in the same old patterns.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I've never even thought of it from that perspective of like them being able to see you, like your resiliency and healing from alcohol as opposed to just always having been a non-drinker.
Yeah,
So it's like that's a great perspective shift to give people who are feeling that kind of shame. And I have clients a lot that say that and even friends and people who have, stopped drinking after they had their kids and feeling a lot of regret and shame. And it's like, but it is. It's like I can imagine that would feel that way, but what good will it do to carry
yeah,
that forward when you're making the next best choice you can make?
exactly. Yeah, that's all you can do is make those changes and show them that this is possible. It is possible to do something and it is possible to stop it and then thrive.
Yeah, and to change anytime you
Yeah.
want.
Well, I
Yeah.
think also when you get stuck in drinking, you feel like it's forever. Like I definitely never believed in a million years that I could be a non-drinker. But one of the main things that I've learned was that humans, we can evolve in our own lifetimes. And I know it sounds a bit cliche, but I thought I was just stagnant and I was going to be a drinker. I was a party animal. I was all of these things and I put myself in these boxes. But actually, since I've given up drinking, I can understand that I was capable of change and that I was evolving and I could do different things and I could, try and write a book or do a podcast or all of these, activities that I'd never even considered before because I was probably a bit too hungover and my brain was a bit too pickled. But when you unpickle it, it's incredible what can happen.
Yeah, and I think too, when we see proof of ourselves making full 180s in our own belief systems, it just makes us better people overall because I think we're more accepting of other people and recognizing, like, wow, I used to think literally completely opposite to the way I feel now. So maybe I should just be more open in
Yeah.
general.
Yeah, and also, people are pleased that you've given up drinking normally because, you not only do you think that you've got better, but also you'll find that people are a bit more happier to hang out with you because they don't have to sort of hold your ponytail while you're regurgitating tequila shots into a pub toilet. So, yeah, you're generally better to be around not only with yourself, but with other people as well, I think. I think you tend to lean on the opinion that people are going to think you're boring, but actually they're just like, oh, thank God that she's given up drinking because she's a bloody liability.
Yeah, oh my God, that's hilarious. I'm sure there was many people who felt that way about me.
Yeah, me. It's all good.
So I wanted to talk about, speaking of kind of like belief systems and everything like that. I know in the book you talked a lot about like your family of origin and kind of how you grew up and what you saw around alcohol, which honestly wasn't even necessarily like really negative. It just sounded like it was kind of like always there and it was a big part of the atmosphere. And so that was what you saw. But I want to hear more about how you think that shaped your relationship with alcohol moving forward, or even just your beliefs around it.
Yeah, well, growing up, everybody around me drank. It was used in the household as a sort of frivolous tool for everybody to have a good time with. My parents were real partiers. They were fun people. They were very welcoming and generous. And so there was always booze everywhere around the house. So I just grew up presuming that that's what I had to do to have fun. I never ever questioned it. Not even until I was 40 did I question that. I just thought my family are the strong partiers. I'm going to carry on the family tradition and hold the family party, mantle high and carry on because that's what I'm here to do and that's how we have fun. That's how we connect and that's what I'm here for. And I have older brothers and sisters. I'm the youngest of four, and they all started partying before me. And I never, ever stopped to question alcohol in my entire life. I just thought, right, when can I join in? And I started stealing booze out of they weren't pouring it on me or, thrusting it down my throat or anything. I just knew that it was my way of being accepted very, very early on. So I was stealing alcohol for the first, from ages of like 11 and 12 and onwards. I was nicking it out of the garage and downing it with my friends when my parents weren't looking. They didn't know that I was doing that, but I was, what else would I have done? Because that's all I was absorbing. That's all I saw. So of course I was going to try and join in. And so I was always the instigator from a young age. All my mates could come round and, I'd say, right, let's go and steal a bottle of wine. And we'd sneak around and sneak it up to my bedroom and steal some cigarettes along with it. And it felt good to have a tool to make friends with and keep friends. And I could use it as, to prop up my personality, really. I kind of pimped my personality with booze.
Mm,
And it was really interesting looking back on those stages after I got sober. It was very clear that I never had a choice about alcohol. I feel like now it was coming for me like arrows in every direction, and I couldn't avoid it. So that's therefore I have no guilt, as we talked about in the start of the podcast. I have no guilt and shame about my drinking because there is no way I could have dodged those arrows. It was in my culture, it was in media. I grew up in the ladette time in the early 90s, when I was in my teens. My parents drank, my grandparents drank, TV was telling me to drink, my culture, pub culture, everything was an arrow heading straight for me, and I was the perfect candidate to be a boozer. And, that is a lot of pressure on somebody when they're young. And unfortunately, this all happens at a stage when you're 14, 13, 14, you're already questioning yourself. I mean, I was. It made me more confident with boys suddenly. I could be the life and soul of the party. I didn't have to think about myself too much. And it was just such an incredible tool at that age to use for me to go, right, here I am. I'm the party girl. I'm going to bring the fun. And it kind of gave me a kudos. I could enter a room and go, right, I've stolen a bottle of wine. Who's in? I didn't really have to put any effort into that. And I knew that I would make friends in that way. So, really, looking back, I was always using alcohol to fit in.
mm. Yeah, and you mentioned culture too, which I think is important to highlight because I think Australia, I haven't been there in a long time, but I feel like the drinking culture, there is like a big drinking culture there. And so, do you feel like sober curiosity is something that's infiltrating Australia as well, or
I think it's
more?
definitely, yeah, it's definitely changing. I I do believe that people are a lot more accepting of someone when I say I don't drink now. Like, I think you'd get a pat on the back rather than, come on, mate, let's have one for the road. What's wrong with you? I think people are more respectful of mental health because, of media and Instagram. People are more understanding of people's health and wellness, which I think is a wonderful thing.
Mhm.
I do think it is still part of the culture like it is in England. But we did a podcast a year ago now on drinking cultures all over the world and about being an expat in different countries. And when we thought about it, I think every country has a drinking culture. There might be a few, maybe Saudi Arabian countries or India perhaps, where it's not as common. But we couldn't think of a country that doesn't have any drinking traditions or background in alcohol. It's kind of part of our history, actually, more than anything else. It's gone on for years, thousands of years, even from the monks in the churches in England brewing their own beer to swap
Yeah.
for food in the original, hundreds of years ago. So it's always been part of our culture. But I definitely feel like even in the last 7 years since I gave up drinking, there is a wave of change happening, and it's slow and it's sure, but it's definitely there is something bubbling under the surface of people understanding the impact of putting a class A carcinogen in your body every weekend, even if it's one glass of wine or 10 pints of beer at the weekend. There's a level of awareness that wasn't even around 7 years ago, that's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I was gonna say, what do you think is catalyzing it? So you think it's the increasing level of awareness just around physical health and the impact? Do you think there's anything to do with like
Yeah, I just think
spiritual
people are
awareness?
more it's more okay to be a bit woo woo and a bit more woke, which is wonderful. I think like people being more in touch with their emotions and realizing that they have to take care of them, their bodies, to live a long time, to be able to take care of their children, to be able to have a good work ethic, and all of these other things that lead to a more successful life. I say successful in your heart rather than financially. I think
Mm.
people are understanding that all of these things are good for you. Like going for a run, it's good for you. Talking about your problems, it's good for your health, it's good for your heart and your brain. So I definitely think media helps. There's a wave of change on TV shows. I think that's a massive impact. You know, we're seeing a lot of talk about alcohol on shows, and it's being shown in a negative light for the first time on a few programs that I've watched. Usually I sit with some rolled up socks next to me because I'm hurling them at the TV screen. Because every time someone drinks, I'm like, no, I'm trying to give up, and all you're doing is showing me boozers. I can't cope. So especially on those UK, like American crime shows, they're always leaning in for a whiskey. I'm like, stop it.
Oh my God,
But
I know. I had to stop watching like reality TV for a while because I was like, that's my guilty pleasure. And they're just like these housewives always getting wasted. And I'm like, in the beginning, I was like, that's kind of making me want to drink. Now I'm just like, thank God I don't anymore. And I just kind of laugh and think it's ridiculous. But yeah, I had to take a break up from reality TV when I first stopped drinking.
what's the boat one? That's my favorite one when they're all on
Oh,
the
Below Deck.
below deck. For me, is like a science experiment. I watch it all the time. So I watch the people go on to their $100,000 a night boat with tequila t-shirts on, carrying a bottle of whatever, get
Yeah.
absolutely blotto, black out, the most incredible experience of your life, like
Yeah.
going on the yacht in the Barbados, and
Yeah.
then they're completely in a blackout. Then they're hungover the next day and can't remember anything, so they have to start drinking again. And then the staff go out drinking the next day. And I'm like, my God, this is one of the most fantastic things you could ever do in your life. But they're all in a complete blackout the whole time.
I know,
It's
and
quite
it gives
fascinating.
me seriously like watching the staff go out, get drunk, and then wake up
Yeah.
at 4 in the morning and work all day on the boat gives me so much PTSD from
And
working in hospitality and just how much I drank. I worked in restaurants for
yeah.
15 years before I finally like pursued what I wanted to do here. And it was great character building for sure, but the drinking was over the top. And I just remember so many times like going into a double 14-hour shift, hungover, so hungover, like I couldn't even think straight, puking in the bathroom on my break. I'm like, oh my God, how did I do that?
Yeah. It gives me PTSD as well, just thinking about the feeling of being hungover and knowing that you have to go to work the next day. It's literally the worst. I used to like be retching into a drain and then trying to serve people in a deli and things like that. Just be like a
Yeah,
complete mess.
yeah.
I don't know
You're
how we
like,
did it.
enjoy your
Even with the
sandwich.
housewives. Sorry, go on.
I just said, enjoy your sandwich. I'll...
Yeah, that's horrible bile breath. Even with the housewife programs, like I love it that they're shown in this sort of glamorous, their daytime look, and it's all like these, caftans, and they're all floating around in these amazing houses. Stick a couple of wines down their neck, and they're all fighting like sailors on the street. It's absolutely brilliant watching. But yeah, there always comes out with a few booze problems, doesn't there? And you can see it. I'm like literally going, you need to go to therapy. You need to go and sort this out. So yeah, I still have
Yeah.
some socks rolled up next to my next to my hand when I watch any television program.
Oh my God, I know it's hilarious. It is funny. My husband's always like, "How can you watch this shit?" I'm like, just it's like psychology to me. It's
Yeah, it's
entertaining.
yeah,
And
yeah,
there actually is more and more housewives now that aren't drinking or that are like, "Yeah, I'm just taking a break. I'm not drinking right now." I'm like, "Whoa, this is crazy." It's even
especially
infiltrating Bravo.
especially Vanderpump Rules. I love reality TV.
Yeah,
It's kind of like my secret vice. Well, it's
me
not a
too.
secret. I don't care that anyone knows. My brain can switch off, and I just love watching it for these exact reasons. And in Vanderpump Rules, I think there's maybe four of them that have gone sober now. So every time I'm like, yes, come on, you guys, keep carrying on about it. Because they have like a sparkling water tasting event and things like
Yeah.
that. my God, this is the best.
I
Yeah.
know.
I love
I
it when famous people are out there sharing the message because it has huge impact. I'm just a little voice here in a village in Australia, but when someone else like that gets their hands on it and starts talking about it, especially sober curiosity in this kind of place between a pub and an AA meeting where people get a bit stuck and don't realize they're worthy of professional help. Because they always think, well, I have to be an extreme drinker. I have to be kind of like passed out on a park bench with a bottle of Jack Daniels clutched to my chest to be deserving of support. Where, of course, that's not the case. And when people come out and talk about it, any famous people, and say, I was a binge drinker, it was giving me anxiety, so I've decided to quit. It's such a simple message. It's like, actually, this wasn't working for me, and now I'm going to talk about it. And that's the thing with AA and stuff. People are sort of not really kind of falling for that I want to be anonymous thing, because how does being anonymous help? Like AA helps thousands of people all over the world every day. I'm totally for it.
Mhm.
But being anonymous, I'm not sure how being anonymous about something can help. That's all.
Yeah, yeah, I really agree. I know in your book you talk about having a really helpful therapist, Diane, I think was her name, that like was really transformational for you. And I just think there's many paths to recovery. And one thing I notice with AA is like I think it has a beautiful place for a lot of people, but if you are in that gray area, you don't really fit in AA. And that's why I do like sober curious sister circles. I built a yurt in my yard and they've been so
Amazing.
great. And it's like always this combination of women who are like fully sober, and have been, some of them go to AA, and then women who are like, I'm just kind of exploring, I'm curious. And like that sharing of wisdom between women that may never be in an AA room together, I think is really amazing. And it like kind of bridges that gap for alcohol being it's a spectrum, right? So like maybe people that have gotten to the far end of the spectrum need more rigidity and structure like AA provides, but people in the middle ground, like we need to like evolve our options for support.
And whatever works is what I always say, whatever works for you. And often people write to me, say, I did what you said. I went to see a therapist and I didn't like them. What do I do now? I'm like, well, you go and get another therapist, or you go to AA, or you read another book, or, you go on a retreat, or do whatever works for you, because there is an answer to this and there is a way out. And it's just a matter of finding your path. And you might
Yeah.
have to have a machete and, bash your way through the bush a little bit to be able to find what makes you happy. But that's what it's all about. It's finding that thing. And it could
Yeah.
be the first person you meet, it could be the 10th person. For Lucy, who I used to do the podcast with, she met me and she'd never even considered giving up drinking before, but she could see that we were similar. And sometimes all you need is that similarity with someone. It could be a random person that you've only met once and go, gosh, well, if they're quite like me, so therefore maybe I can do what they're doing. And that
Yeah.
might be enough for you. Yeah.
I love that. I love what you said too about just finding what works for you because I think so often people, and I found part of like the healing process in general, not just in sobriety, but just personal development is like that inner development of that inner compass. I think so often we're looking for answers or people to give them to us. And it's like, this was my unique roadmap. Like, but while it's good to gather the information, you still have to make your own and like take that level of ownership over your life. And I think removing yourself out of like being a bystander into like an active participant, being like, all right, I'm gonna have to like dig in here and figure this shit out.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, totally. And it does take a lot of digging in, and that's what people find difficult because obviously with that digging in, all the emotions that you've been blocking out for, 25 years of binge drinking or
Mm.
whatever, bubble to the surface, and you've got to confront them, which can be really hard and can cause people to relapse. But riding those out and breathing through them and sitting through the cravings and all of those little tricks and tips, playing a tape forward and all those little, work sentences we use in the sobriety realm, they that we have those sayings for a reason because they work. And you do have to sit through those feelings and get out the other side, and there's nothing more empowering than getting through pain or struggling in some way and then not drinking through it. And it doesn't matter how short lived that moment is, they build and they build and they build, and you have this kind of wall of sobriety in the end. Each tiny win becomes this kind of brick wall of confidence that you end up having, which you didn't even know was within you. And each tiny, tiny little win helps you build this kind of structure around you, which gives you the ability to socialize again and, be a normal citizen of this world and not be worrying about drinking or even be preoccupied with it in any way. So it's incredible how those little wins can build up, and people go, it's hard, but it's hard in the moment and it will pass. And getting through it is going to be your best ally throughout your sobriety.
Yes. Oh my God. I love the concept of celebrating micro wins because it's like that's the evidence you need to start compiling that you are
Yeah.
capable.
Yep. That is totally correct. Yeah. Agree with you.
Yeah, I want to hear a little more too, because I know you were sharing about the family dynamic and stuff, and I wanted to hear because I feel like that must have been a little bit hard transition, and I remember you talking about it a little bit in the book too. Is how did you feel about transitioning to sobriety with your family having been such heavy drinkers, or like that having been such a central focus? Like, did that cause any apprehension for you going into sobriety? How did they receive it?
It was funny when, I mean, I went on to have three children, two children when I decided to go sober. And it was after 6 weeks after my daughter was born that I'd gone out and got massively wasted. And, someone at the pub, it's in the book, someone in a pub had said to me, "What are you doing? Are you having a good night?" I said, "Oh, yeah, I've got a 6-week-old baby at home. Ha ha ha."
Yeah.
Like dancing my maternity knickers up round my ears, like being a total lost it in a local pub. And the guy looked at me and went, "What are you doing here then?" And I was like, "Oh my God, he's right." And I went home and I woke up the next day and had a terrible hangover and full of anxiety, which is the main reason I gave up alcohol, was because of the anxiety.
Mm.
And I gave up drinking forever, pretty much 12 weeks after that, after having some therapy and understanding and unraveling why I was struggling with my relationship with booze, which I didn't even know that I had a problematic um, relationship with it until I went to see the therapist. I just thought, oh, I'll just learn how to drink better. But of course, then once I realized I had to give up, I didn't tell my parents I was having therapy. They would have thought I was a complete wet blanket. But I eventually, after I think it was about a year of being sober and not telling anyone. I don't recommend doing this because it was actually an error and could have caused me to probably lead back to drinking because I sort of isolated myself a bit. But for the first time, when I gave up, something felt private. I felt like this is something that I'm doing for me, my husband, and my children. No one else matters. And for me, that was a big thing because I'm a people pleaser. So normally I would be like, love a bit of drama. I'll give, I've got the story down the pub the next day. I could have like made it this dramatic thing. Oh my God, I think I'm going to give up drinking. But it wasn't. There wasn't any sort of trumpets going off or flash mobs or anything. It was just me saying to my husband, I think I have a problem and I need help. And it felt very, very private and very important. And just blabbing about it to anyone didn't feel that the right thing to do, even with my parents, because I knew there'd be a level of judgment there. Because it's like
Mm.
looking in a mirror to them. It's like me saying, well, there, of course, by me saying I'm giving up drinking, it is a reflection on them. And even if I don't want it to be, they would question themselves and go, well, probably is this our fault? Maybe we shouldn't have drunk around the kids as when they were growing up. But again, for them, it was coming for them like it was for me. They had no reason to question alcohol growing up. They didn't see alcoholism as it were, or as we see it, as a problem. So, they have the same problems probably as I did, but it's more difficult for them to see it because they haven't experienced anxiety or any of the downsides. So my parents still drink. I did tell them a year in, which was a difficult conversation. I'd actually written a blog post for a local magazine about giving up drinking and what it was like, and it was called Confessions of a Sober Mama, I think it was. It was ages ago. It was very early on in my sobriety. It was kind of my first piece of writing. And instead of emailing it directly to the publisher, I sent it to my mum. And that was my message to her and said, this is what's been going on with me. This is how I feel. And this is what I'm doing now. And I thought she was going to phone me up and be, don't be so ridiculous, sort of like, don't overreact. Because I think that's often the case when somebody hasn't seen you as a problem drinker. Because I was a binge drinker and a party animal, they just go, well, you're just fun. Like, what's wrong with you? But people don't see you when you're lying in bed the next day with your finger on your pulse, wondering whether you're going to die. So it's kind of a difficult conversation. You sort of have to try and convince people that it was bad for me. But, you could waste hours doing that. I just say I'm sober now and like that's all you need to know. But with my parents, my mum called me up that day and just said, um, I'm sorry, I didn't know you were going through that, and I hope you're okay. So, and they've been super supportive ever since. I mean, they definitely think about their drinking now. And whenever their mum said, I haven't had a glass of wine this week, she's always telling me about it. My dad's always coming up with ideas for the podcast,
Yeah.
and totally, they listen to every episode, and they're very, very proud. So, yeah, I couldn't have more supportive parents. But it would be nice if they didn't down a bottle of wine when they came over for a barbecue. But that's a conversation I'll have with them
You like
soon.
celebrate the micro wins, honey.
Yeah, celebrate the microphones. I can't change them. I never would. It's up to them what they do. But I definitely feel like it's a good topic, actually, like to say, my influence is just because of what I do. It's not because of what I say. So I know if someone had said to me, a billion times, you've got to stop drinking, you've got to stop drinking, you've got a
Oh yeah,
problem. I would have picked up a bottle of wine in front of them and downed it because I was like, of course I
same.
haven't got a problem. So it
Yeah,
just doesn't work. And it's one of those emails we get, my husband drinks, what can I do? And all I say is you just go sober yourself and you
lead the
lead
way.
the way and you be a role model and you can't avoid those sparkly eyes that sober people have and the joy and the happiness and getting up early and having all these new hobbies, and people see that and they're absorbing it from afar, and it's really, really powerful, much more powerful than you think. So I
Yeah.
would never tell my parents not to drink, but yeah, they're very, very supportive. But it is a hard conversation with when all as a family is alcohol.
Right. Yeah, wow. Yeah, it's so powerful to hear that you were able to kind of find your own way through. And I think it's actually kind of cool to hear about, people honoring their separate journeys and being able to be supportive. And you did mention one thing too and I was going to say, I always say too, be the lighthouse, not the tugboat. And
Yeah.
that's what I always remind people of. I'm like, just exist as you are. And like you said, it's undeniable. Like the sparkly eyes, the energy, you can feel it, the presence. It's just a different shift that you make.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, it's a really good point because I think often people try to make people give up drinking. And unfortunately, as far as I can tell, unless, maybe it's different when somebody is more extreme and they need an intervention, they need
mm,
people to come on board and they need, medical support. That's a different situation. That's not what I'm talking about. I think what I'm talking about is a problem drinker, whereas everything they do revolves around drinking, every social event revolves around drinking. I'm talking about a normal drinker, actually, is what we'd
yeah,
call it in
normal.
society. It's a normal drinker, somebody who drinks because that's what they do and that's what everybody else does. And that's what we question on the podcast. Like, is it normal? Is it
Right.
okay to like numb ourselves out and to write ourselves off every weekend and affect our mental health? And why don't we care about our body? So it's not doesn't have to be about how much you drink. I think it's a really important point. It's about your own mental relationship with alcohol. It's not about one glass or two glass or 10 glasses or even once a year. It's not about that. It's about whether you have a good mental relationship with alcohol. And I don't know anybody that does or ever has, but it's very confronting to ask yourself those questions. But I think if anyone was to sit down and go, is my relationship with alcohol good? Like what good is it? I can imagine actually for somebody who's very, very shy, that is an incredible tool. But again, that isn't who you are. So again, you're kind of hiding who you are behind a bottle, even if you're using it to come out of your shell a little bit. So it's really interesting. I think because I've totally overeducated myself about it, and it's all I talk about it all the time, I can always see the dark side. I can always see
Yeah.
what actually doing and saying, no, no, that's not helping you. That's going to actually make you more anxious and more shy. So you can
Yeah.
always like speak out, like, this is never ever, no matter how much you drink, it's never ever going to be a positive result.
Yeah, I know that's similar. I always think about, and emphasize like social skills are developed like a muscle. It's a skill that needs to be developed, and if it's never developed in the absence of alcohol, then of course it's going to
Yeah,
feel awkward, navigating socializing without it. But like you
yeah,
said earlier too, the more you practice, the more comfortable you get, and soon enough you don't need it, and therefore you're like, I'm glad that that crutch is gone, and I get to like be liberated in the person I am and just show up as myself. But it's not
yeah.
without like that hump of discomfort. And then one other thing you said too, which I deal with a lot of clients that are people pleasers. And do you see any parallels between like people pleasing and binge drinking?
Absolutely. My story is that when I was 14, I I had two very close friends, and they sort of walked away from me at school one day, and they never spoke to me again. They were like my best mates. It sounds minor, but of course, any sort of trauma is relative to you and how you feel about it. And I was very, very traumatized by that event. And I think my drinking changed at that age. And my people pleasing actually stemmed from that. Because not only then did I want to make friends, I wanted to keep them. And the only tool and the only way I knew how to do that was to entertain them. So I became this kind of puppet who was like, taken out of the box on a Friday night and put back in and not cared about on a Sunday night. I always say, give a party girl a cuddle, not a line of cocaine. And that's what I definitely needed. I needed a cuddle instead of a line of cocaine in those days. And I didn't know that about myself. And I became a people pleaser because I was scared of losing people, and I was scared of that happening to me again and losing some friends. It frightened me. And it just developed to the point where it was to my own detriment. I was entertaining people, sleeping around, recreational drug use, all of it, because I was a people pleaser. And that was the reason why I just wanted to make people happy so they wouldn't leave me again. And it takes a lot of work to understand all that. I had no idea when I went into therapy that that was the reason why. I just thought, well, I'm just a silly mum who likes an escape wine after the kids have gone to bed. I'm just this silly binge drinker. There's no reason for it. I haven't got any trauma. Other people's trauma is much worse than mine. I've got a loving family. I live in a nice house. Like, I didn't feel deserving of help.
Mhm.
But when I was in there, she was like, actually, it was actually one of the turning points for me when I told her about my life. She said, oh, it's very sad, isn't it? I was like, what? She's like, what's happened to you is really sad. I was like, oh my God, it's making me emotional thinking about it now. But I realized that it was. It was sad that my friends had left me, and it was sad, and it wasn't my fault. And it was sad that I had kind of rebelled in this way and, let people use my body and mind for their own entertainment. It was sad.
Yeah.
And it was good to learn that somebody else could see that in me because I couldn't see it in myself. I just thought that I wasn't worthy of anything, that I was just treated like that because that's how people are treated. And actually, it wasn't normal.
Yeah.
And that's why therapy is so good, because I couldn't see that in myself. And I went in there and spread out my life before her like a pack of cards, and was able to take away the bad bits, excuse me, and leave the good cards behind and walk out of there with my own pack of cards that I held to my chest closely, because it was all the important things, and leaving the rest behind felt really, really amazing. So yeah, it's difficult to not be a people pleaser now, but of course with sobriety you get boundaries, you know who you want to hang out with, you understand the people that are trying to squeeze you for entertainment or for money, or you understand and can see things so much more clearly, which is hugely helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, oh my gosh, that was so good. Just take a moment to let that sink in because I have had moments very similar to that, recognizing, that what I thought was normal at the time was such a sad, disrespectful, and way to treat myself, and it was just representative of like someone who didn't love themselves, someone who was so unworthy, and that none of that, and not so unworthy, so that felt so unworthy. And it's really hits you like a ton of bricks when you realize that, because we dismiss the behaviors, we laugh it off. And I was very self-deprecating when I drank. Like I would piss my pants, I would get so drunk and black out, throw up, do and say embarrassing things. And it's like, yeah, you can laugh it off in the moment and whatnot, but it is kind of a process to realize, like, wow, I was actually in a lot of pain to have been treating myself that way and tolerating those types of behaviors and all of that. It's just, it's eye-opening to realize, like, I
Yeah.
didn't love myself like I should have.
Yeah, I do. That's one of my big regrets is that I didn't. I mean, I don't like to live in regret because it's a waste of energy. But when I look back, I think, gosh, I just wish I'd been a bit nicer to myself, like a bit nicer
Mm.
to my. Like, I used to think it was quite funny to sort of piss myself after puking on a night out. Imagine doing that now in sobriety. You'd be like it's like totally out of control. It's like somebody who's you just can't even imagine. It's a completely
Mhm.
different person. But I think that's what is enables me and you probably to sort of separate ourselves from our past by just going, well, that was somebody that was heavily under the influence of a really strong drug. That wasn't
Mhm.
my fault. That is my society, my culture, everything else that we talked about earlier coming for me and it's not really my fault. So how can I live in regret and shame when actually, everybody else was doing that too, like and
Yeah.
normalized for me. So it's really hard to see it when you're in it. And it does take it's someone else to draw that out of you and go, actually, that's not okay. And I think in the book, you remember probably that I wrote a list in there where she said, write down everything that's happened to you when you were completely
Mm.
wasted. And it's like those things that we just said, like pissing your pants, puking on someone, sleeping with someone, all these awful, awful things, which I know they do in AA as well. Like you write a forgiveness letter to yourself and your friends. And she said to me at the end, like, write not okay next to it. And I realized in that moment, like, nothing that I'd done was okay. Like snorting coke and being this kind of staying up all late and all night and just being this kind of real partier and that being my badge of honor. It actually was completely awful to myself. And I've never ever taken a moment to look at it like that. And now I just look back at that person and go, well, that actually wasn't me. That was somebody who was sad, had a bit of a void in their heart from that situation at school that was trying to fill it with something else and that didn't know what that thing was. And I was searching for it in all the wrong places.
Yeah.
And it's fortunate, I think, that it happened so late for me. Like at 40, I sort of questioned my alcohol intake. I do wish even when I look back on choices that I make, I'm just like, I just wish I could have, even with dating and stuff, I never really went on a date. It was always like a one night stand that I hoped would turn into something else. I wasn't living in a reality. And now when I see kids, going on these lovely dates or going to the cinema or going for a coffee in the morning, I think, gosh, that is so wholesome compared to what I used to do. Whereas
Mhm.
I just like giving everything away for free. I just think,
Yeah.
oh, what am I doing? Yeah, so I do have some moments, pangs of like, oh, what would I have said to myself? Like, what would I go back and say to that for 15-year-old girl who was, obviously broken but didn't realize it?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what I'd say. I'd just be like, you're okay. You're fine. You were fine as you were before you started drinking. I was a happy, confident kid before I put a bottle to my mouth. Like, I was fine. There was
Yeah.
no trauma, there was nothing going on. I was actually really confident. And I know people often say they find out they're an introvert when they go sober, but actually, I'm starting to understand it was the opposite for me. I was an extrovert before I started drinking, and I think drinking toned me down a little bit. And now I'm back to who I was. And it is all about not only finding about who you were as a drinker, but I think one of the best things about giving up drinking is finding out who you were before it, and of course, who comes after it.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's what you were saying about all the cards being stacked against us with societal programming, culture, media, all of these things. It's like, and then you tag in, any sorts of personal traumas and how your family drank, etc. It's almost makes it easier to be like, I feel this profound sense of gratitude for my own courage to follow my intuition with regards to stepping away from that because we do have everything is so normalized and like I didn't know for with full certainty that, my life was going to transform in some really profound ways. I just had like an inkling, but it's like I very easily could have just been like what you said, like, this is just my life. I'm just a binge drinking party girl and like everyone else is doing it. And I feel like it does take a lot of courage to kind of follow that, like pull at that thread and to follow it. And so I know that what we're saying too is like a lot of shame and guilt can come up, but you can also kind of flip that on its head and be like, actually, I'm kind of badass that I was able to do
Yeah.
this without any evidence that like my life was going to improve and went through all this like really fucking hard work, not with that without any evidence, just gathering those micro wins.
Yeah, and it takes all those micro wins and a year at least probably to find out what it's all about.
Yeah,
It's not just giving up drinking. It's actually not about alcohol at all. It's
right.
about finding out who you were without it. And that's really interesting. And also a lot of people say to me, like, how do you give up? How do you stop being the person that you've always known, like this entire identity? And I think now I realize, like, I always chose to be like a follower. I always was trying to fit in with people. And now I often say to people, like, you've got to choose. Like, do you want to be a sheep, like in your community, or do you want to be a leader? That's the choice. Like, I'm not saying like a leader, like, like a dictator or anything, but like, just to be someone who makes their own choices, which is hard because naturally you are joined to your tribe. And going sober, that's why we call the podcast Sober Awkward, is because you are stepping away from your tribe. And that causes a fight or flight feeling because it's like a caveman. It's survival to be with your tribe. And because drinking is so ingrained in our culture, we do it to be part of our community and our society. But when you step out of that, it's why it feels awkward and anxiety inducing, and why, socializing feels so hard is because you're taking yourself back thousands of years and exposing yourself to the world for the first time in reality. And, that feeling is built in and you can't avoid it, but you can navigate through it. And that's what we do in sobriety. That's all we're doing is we're navigating our way through this new life that we're not used to and we have to survive. And there is nothing better than that because you get to learn on the way, which is brilliant. Like my brain's been dead for 25 years, like nothing was going in. It's like a dormant volcano.
Yeah.
And that's what happens. Your brain starts to come alive again. You start to, understand what this is all about and the benefits of it and what you did to yourself and how to get over it. It's so fascinating and deep, and it never ever ceases to amaze me, sobriety, quite honestly, because there is always so much to learn.
Oh, yes. Round of applause. It's so true. And I love what you said about it's not even necessarily being about the alcohol. It's about why we're using it in a way that reflects someone who doesn't love themselves and how can we get back to a space where we do. And I think a lot of people can feel like their choice to step away from drinking or their tribe, like you mentioned, is a sign of weakness, but it's the sign of a leader, of somebody who's willing to follow their own internal compass over what everyone else is doing. And I think that when we do that, we inspire other people to do the same and to gather their courage and to be like, look, what is so great about following the crowd? I mean, societal programming, especially in America, is nothing to write home about.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
Probably why
Especially
most of
now.
us
Yeah,
self-medicate, so it's like I think I think more and more people are realizing that you really need to define your own programming in order to create the reality you want. There's no guaranteed fulfillment with the societal programming you have laid out for you. And if you subscribe to it without any further examination or measuring against your own integrity doesn't mean you're going to be happy. Doesn't guarantee that at all. And in fact, it can leave us kind of pissed off and unhappy when we follow it blindly and realize that it didn't give us what we thought we wanted.
yeah, so true. And I think also like we give we had a brilliant comedian, Lee Mack. He's a famous English comedian on the podcast, and one of the best points he made when he came on was like, I think as a society we give alcohol the credit for a night out. And we wake up and get next day and go, oh, that was a good night out. Everyone was drinking. Wasn't it a laugh? Wasn't it fun? And we're starting to understand that it's not the alcohol that's giving you a good night. That's actually taking away the night, especially after two glasses. You're kind of in a state of not really absorbing anything. The brain's not remembering anything. It's nothing is kind of sparking anymore. And he said, you can still get that feeling as a sober person. It's not about how many glasses of wine you've drunk. It's about, is the music good? Are you with people that you really like and that make you feel comfortable? Is the environment nice? Like, is your nice cold fizzy water good? It's about everything else. And a good night out for me now isn't about, you know, I find it really, really hard to be around drinkers now. I have to do it often, but I just find there's a point where they've got a ticket to a train that I can't get on, and it's like it's gone, it's out the station, and I'm not on there, and I'm out. I'm mentally out. And so now I think that's why it's so important to do find yourself a group of sober women like you have and some sober mates that you can go out for an evening with, have some authentic chat, walk away with your head held high and just know that you've had a sort of wholesome experience. Because those nights out, like alcohol's getting the credit for what? Oh yeah, we had a good time because we were all drunk, but no one's there. I always call them the shark eyes. Like I know the point. It's about 8:30, especially if you've been out. Yes, if you go out at 7, it's about 8:30. People's eyes start to change. The black shark eyes are out and they're kind of the lights are on and no one's home. And I find it just difficult to be around when people change now because I'm like, I'm not here anymore. You're not here anymore.
Yeah.
This is going to be a good exchange and I'm going home. And so it's really good now knowing when that point is and knowing when I'm comfortable or not. And that's another thing that comes with being sober is just feeling that vibe and when it changes. And, you do have to often go through a bit of an awkward moment of knowing that you're out and being sober and dealing with questions and all those other things that come along with it. But also knowing when to leave is such a good point as well.
Yeah. Totally. I know. I feel like I went through that whole phase too. And I find the more I build my like-minded sober community, the more tolerance I have for, you
Yes.
know, the occasional rendezvous with drunkards. And I'm like, all right, well, back to my sober friends now. And
Yeah.
whereas before, when I didn't have sober friends and I only had my like party animal like friends, I'm like, I can't do this. I can't do
No,
this. And you feel like you can't do it, but then it's like as your reality starts to reflect you as a sober person, your
yeah.
tolerance shifts and you're like, yeah, this is kind of entertaining in small doses.
Yeah. I just
Very
think also they don't want me there now. Like everybody knows what I do for a job. So they're like, why would you want? I know for certain that I wouldn't have wanted a sober person at a party that I was having.
yeah.
Firstly, because I didn't want sober people to see what I was doing. I mean, if I couldn't remember my own behavior, I certainly didn't want somebody I didn't know remembering what I was doing. So
Yeah.
yeah, I know I didn't want a sober person at my party, so I presume I'm not very welcome at others. It's
Oh
just
yeah.
too much. It's
Yeah.
too much. Because then they all start coming up and explaining their drinking habits to you. I'm
Why
like,
is
oh,
that?
God,
What
I'm
is
out.
that? It's so funny. They're like, oh man, I need to call you. I'm like, we don't have to talk about this at a wedding, okay? Just
Yeah,
enjoy
not
yourself.
right now. I
I'm
every
like,
day
we're
I
at a
go.
wedding and you are shit-faced.
Yeah, you are shit-faced, and you don't normally drink this much. But every day I go for a walk down the seafront where I live, and there's a few bars that I walk past every day. It's like they're just like lovely little sort of dinner places, and literally every day someone holds up a glass of wine and says, "All right, Vic, I'm only having one." I'm like, I'm not your fucking conscience, mate. Carry on with what you're doing. This has nothing to do with me. You don't need to tell me. But yeah, I
Oh
think
my
they mean well because they're just trying to say, look, I'm conscious of it. I'm conscious of it. But yeah,
Yeah,
it is
it
a bit
is
annoying.
funny how, yeah, it's so funny. I always feel like kind of like guilty or something when people
Yes, yeah,
start
party
explaining their
pooper.
drinking. I'm
Yeah.
just like, I'm just existing. I'm not judging you. What I do for work is separate from like us here. It's
It's
fine.
not though. It's
Yeah,
not though. You want
it's
it to be.
not. And you do. It's like it's not, but it's like it is almost like you're like, okay, like let's just, it's fine. Don't worry. You know.
And
But
people often ask me what I do, and I say, well, I'm a professional party pooper because that's literally what I'm doing now. It's like people that drink just think I'm just this kind of bad influence taking away their fun. Like all their mates are going sober. They're like, this is your fault.
oh my God, that's hilarious. I actually do have one question about like when people, when within the work you do, and I know I get this a lot too, where people will say like, well, alcohol's been around for like thousands of years, and like you said earlier, the monks used it, this, that, like, what do you say when people are, when you kind of alluded early, like nothing really good comes out of it, you know? And I think people are kind of lying to themselves in certain ways around like what they're getting from it. So, what is your thinking around that? I'd love to hear about.
I think it depends who the person is. Like if it's someone who I just know's a big drinker, I think I'm fighting a losing battle, and whatever I say is going to sound preachy.
Hmm.
Um, I think that's why you just got to lead with example of people like that. But if someone's really questioning, saying it's, I had someone recently saying that red wine was good for them.
Oh, yeah.
So, because it's got tannin in it, but actually it's like a vat of like 5 million liters of wine you'd have to get the benefits of the tannin because actually the alcohol is just destroying that and is so toxic. So, but I just don't bother
Yeah.
because I'm not going to listen if I say, I'm just going to sound like a twat if I start going, well, alcohol does this and this is a class A carcinogen and blah, 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 blah. I just can't be bothered.
Yeah. Do
I'll
you
talk
think
about
there
it
was
on the
ever,
podcast.
ever
I
like
don't
a
know.
benefit, even back in the day when they were using it like ceremonially? Like, because I still, I'm like, I don't see any, like what was the benefit even then, or why has it been around for so long,
I
you know?
think people are just trying to convince themselves that there's a benefit to it because they can't stop doing it. That's the
Yeah.
case. Like,
Hmm.
why? People are not going to question something that they're pouring down their throat all the time. Like, they have to think that there is something good happening with it. Otherwise, why wouldn't you do it? It's
Hmm.
because it's a social lubricant that it's sold to be like this big con that's sold to us is this is what you need to socialize. People just think that they need it. They're not willing. Like somebody who's a big drinker and enjoy, I'm a big drinker, I enjoy drinking. I know a lot of those people. They are not prepared to listen or even consider that it could be bad for them because it's like saying you are taking away my best friend. This is the one thing I look forward to every week. This is what I do. This is how I relax. This is how I escape from the children. This is me. And it's what we've been speaking about throughout this entire podcast. People are not willing to look at themselves and go, is this okay? And am I actually happy? Is this making me happy? Because they're not looking at the consequences. It was only when I had a screaming child in my arms when I was hungover that I was able to see that that was a consequence to my drinking, that I wasn't capable of being a good parent. And I think people don't look at the consequence. A hangover is a massive consequence to your drinking habits, whether it's a headache or 2 days of you having anxiety. And I think people just ignore the consequences and the health negatives because they don't want to say goodbye to their best friend because it's all they know. And
Yeah.
for me, it's like, if I do say things to people that are big drinkers, it's like me slagging off their friend, like, your friend doesn't like you anymore. And people just don't want to hear it. And often get asked this actually. And I say to people like, oh, I've got this friend, and every time I go over there, they're asking me to drink, and I feel really pressured and I feel like I'm going to give in. But I actually also want to speak to them about their drinking. And I often say to what the first reaction I think on a lot of sober coaches and in this kind of realm, people say, well, that person isn't your friend. And I do find that quite hard. I think that's quite harsh because, like, just because someone drinks doesn't mean to say they're not your friend. And I think people often ditch all their drinking friends when they get sober because they're like, well, I don't do that anymore. And they're different to me. And this is what I do because I'm sober now. But I always say to people, keep those friends on the periphery, care about them still because they are you and they are where you were and they will see what you're doing. And having those people in your friendship circles and keeping them near is really important because I think they will need you at some stage, and they will definitely need you. There's no doubt about it.
Mhm.
And if you just ditch them, they're not going to see your changes. And I think it's important. I'm not saying like hang out with those people all the time if they're trying to get you to drink. Don't do that. But keep them in your periphery because you might be important for them one day.
Yeah. Yeah, personally, I had a little bit of a struggle with that when I first stopped drinking because I kind of almost overcompensated. Like I'm like, I'll be the DD. I will, you guys get drunk, here's a drink, like that kind of thing, the people pleasing.
Yes.
Um, but then I started to feel an energy of like, I feel like I'm just triggering these people by like being here, by not drinking. And so it's interesting. It's hard. It is really hard to find like that balance of at what at what degree do I maintain a friendship? And for a lot of us who are like all or nothing, binge drinkers, I feel like finding those like degrees of separation, being fully open or fully shut is hard. And that's something I've really learned like in my own sober journey is to like have different boundaries for different people. Like you don't have to give everyone full access or none at all. Um, and just evaluating like, do I feel like these people have my best interest? Are they actually happy for me? Like there was so much of that where and I'm also very highly sensitive, which I think is another big reason why I drank. I can really feel the emotions and energy of other people that I don't even think they know they're giving off. And so there was a lot of that too in early sobriety that was like really fucking with me, where I'm like, I don't even know if these people are like happy that I'm not drinking. I think I
Right.
might have been the drunk friend that made everyone feel better about their drinking.
Yeah.
So it's hard. And it's like, I agree with you though. And I think for me now, I do feel like I would have much more bandwidth for like different relationships, but it's hard sometimes in early sobriety because when you're so vulnerable, like it's hard to maintain relationships where you're not really sure where you stand because I was like not strong enough in my own sense of self yet. And I'm like, I just don't know if I can like maintain these relationships. And it was really hard for me to like decide. And so, but I really like that opinion of, don't write people off immediately because I think relationships can grow. And just as you are growing and evolving, like other people are going to do the same, hopefully, maybe just not at the same exact time.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think it's important to, you know, it's hard if people are drinking. I'm not saying it's not hard. It's hard if people are drinking and they're best friends that you've had all your life.
Yeah.
It can be difficult. But I think it's a matter of sort of reframing those friendships more than anything else. And meeting them for breakfast instead of meeting them for dinner and just
Mm,
changing things up so that they're aware, you know, you don't even have to say like, I'm not going out for dinner with you anymore, we're meeting for breakfast. You just kind of, push it out there and make it clear in a really subtle way that you're changing and this is what works now. And if they're not
yeah.
up for that, well, that's not okay, that's fine, but this is how that we are going to socialize now. And it's
Right.
not going to be like it was because
Mhm.
that's not what makes me comfortable. I often just think honesty is always going to be the best policy because you can't argue with honesty. If you say to your best mate, I'm not drinking now, going to a nightclub, going to our old haunt and hanging out with all those people, it just isn't going to work for me anymore. And I need to protect myself. My safety in my sobriety is the most important thing. And I'd like your support. I think those conversations that happen before an event or before a wedding or before
Yeah.
re-enter the social world are really important. Even on it's really powerful on WhatsApp groups. I find a lot of people, sending glasses of wine and, all the groups that I'm with, it's like I sometimes just have to say, guys, is it okay if we don't share the wine memes anymore? Like it's making me feel uncomfortable. And they go, oh yeah, actually I hadn't really thought about that. And I don't do it in a wanky way like this is triggering me. I'm just like, can you understand why that wouldn't work for me? Like, and try and just be really approach things softly so that it doesn't sound like, well, I'm sober now and I deserve
Yeah.
everybody to do what I do. There's
Mhm.
ways of going about things that soften the process and make it slower and easier for everybody to understand your reasons why.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's so true and gives you space to kind of navigate, advocate for yourself, but do it in a way that feels comfortable to you and in alignment. I love it. I know that we're getting close, or we're kind of like at our time, but I had two more questions that I really
Go
wanted.
for
And so, if you have time, I really would love to ask number one, okay? Because part of the reason why I loved your book so much was because of how much you talk about backpacking, travel, and how you at the time thought, like, I am living like my best life. And so, can you just tell me a little bit about like how you view sober travel now versus your travel then, and like how your thinking has shifted with regards to what your best life even means?
Yeah, so when I gave up drinking quite early on, I decided to swap my days, my nights for days. And it was a very simple change that I made was that I was going to focus on filling my days so that I wasn't worried about missing out FOMO of the nights. I've done nights for 25 years. I've danced on every podium in every city all over the world for years. I've done it all. There's nothing I haven't done. I've traveled the world, lived out of a backpack for 10 years. I blew a finger off with a firework. I've done all sorts of crazy shit. So I don't
Oh yeah,
need
and
the
Thailand.
night anymore. Yeah.
Right.
So go on, go.
I was gonna say the finger. I forgot that was in the book.
Yeah, it's the bird. Um, So that was a huge change that I made that made it a lot easier for me, especially on holidays. I mean, I've just been around the world with my kids for 7 months, and I can look forward to holidays now, which is like the most wonderful feeling. And I can book to do stuff in the days. It's like you're talking about dreading. I used to dread going out towards the end of my sobriety because I knew not only was I going to make a dick out of myself, or towards the end of my drinking rather, not only was I going to make a dick out of myself, but I was going to have anxiety for a week. So I dreaded my life. I dreaded everything that I was doing because I knew once I had one that I couldn't stop. So therefore it was going to affect my whole week and affect my relationship with my husband and my children and everything. But now I don't have that. I don't have that sort of feeling of going into anything knowing it's going to go badly. I trust myself, and that's what I realized when I gave up drinking was that I'd never trusted myself and I didn't have my own back. But now I have my own back and trust myself in any situation. It means I can go on holiday and just enjoy myself and make memories and have fun and do all the things that holidays are for. I thought holidays were for, afternoon beers, sunset beers on a hammock. I thought they were about going to a rave on a beach in Thailand. I thought they were about shagging around and being a lunatic and, running away from all of my problems. That's what I thought traveling was. And as we said before we started recording, I lived in Sydney for a year and never saw the Opera House or a kangaroo because I was too busy being hungover. So, yeah, the holidays, everything changes. I'm able to look forward to stuff now, and that's one of the best things about being sober is that I'm never dreading anything. Like, what's there to dread? I do still dread public speaking. I'm all right like this. That is the one fear that I still have to get over. I do live shows of the podcast. I do talks publicly all the time. Yet I still struggle with that, and that is a hurdle that I'm still working on. But I think another thing that comes with sobriety is that, you know, drinking is a comfort zone that I stayed in for 25 years, and sobriety is a comfort zone that you have to step out of and do the things that make you scared. And, that is another lesson that I've learned is that if I do fear something now, I know I have to do it. When I'm actually doing it, I think, why the fuck am I doing this? This is awful.
No. Oh my God, I'm the same way. I'm always pushing myself
Oh,
outside my comfort
pushing,
zone. And then I
pushing.
like signed up
Yeah,
for like a public speaking and then I'm there and I'm like, why the fuck did I sign up for this? But
yeah.
afterwards, you're like, oh my God, I can do this. I can do this. And I was gonna say too, like, you should not have a fear of public speaking because your speaking is just as captivating as your writing was.
Okay, well, thank you. I mean, everyone says that. I can't believe you're nervous. I can't believe you're nervous. I am literally dying inside before I go on. I feel sick. I feel bloated. I feel my neck goes all red. My knees wobble. My hands shake. I've done Toastmasters for a year. Like I did some training because I knew that it was something I needed to do. But it has got easier, but I still dread it. That's the one thing I still dread. But yeah, which means I will continue to do it
It's
stupidly.
Yeah, it's really funny too, because on my kind of like manifestation, I was telling you how I feel like I really love you and your book and what you're doing because it's all very in alignment with my aspirations. And I always tell people when they're talking, like when I've talked about wanting to do public speaking, I'm like, I'm almost mad that this is like something I feel like I'm supposed to do.
Yes, yeah, I feel exactly the same. Everyone's like, you've got to do this, you've got to share this message. I'm like, but can't I just do it in my bedroom at home on the podcast? Like, I'm doing it enough.
Yeah.
That is, you've kind of reached my limit with it. So part of me wants to go, okay, know your boundary, know that this is not okay. And actually, funnily enough, we interview quite a lot of famous people on the podcast. Like we've had on Fatboy Slim, and we've had on some amazing guests. And I have actually handed that over now to my co-host and said, it makes me so nervous before it, it makes me nervous during it, and I feel like a dick afterwards. You can do this now. And he's bloody brilliant at it. I'm just a mum in Queensland. I don't know how to interview a famous person. Like, I've got no idea. It makes me really, really nervous. So actually, that was a time where I just went, this isn't working for me. You can do it now. Whereas before, if I was a drinker, of course, I would never had a podcast if I was a drinker, but I was such a people pleaser that I just would have done it because I was like, oh, I'm meeting famous people. But now things like that are not an interest to me. So it's lovely to be able to hand things over. I will maybe try and hand over the public speaking to someone else, but I'm not sure I could get a body double nowadays.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love it. I love it. Okay. The last one that I have for you, and I feel like this is a good one to end on, especially with in anticipation of your next book about momming and sobriety, is really just like if you were to talk to a mom, a fellow mom who's kind of like questioning her relationship to alcohol and wondering like, is it worth fully going sober? Like, what would you say are the biggest motherhood always has its struggles, whether we're sober or not, but what do you feel like have been the real benefits of a sober motherhood for you?
I think sometimes I didn't realize the messaging that I was giving my children when I was a drinker. I didn't realize, even though there was so little and probably wouldn't remember it. But I think for mums, the messaging, you think, oh, I just need a wind down wine or I need to escape this. But I realize now that if I'd carried on, it would have felt like I need a drink to deal with you. I need a drink to cope with your behavior. So it has this kind of like ongoing effect, this generational effect. Well, my mum had to drink to deal with me, so therefore maybe I need to drink to deal with my children or to deal with life. And I never really considered the messaging or how it's passed on. And I know that a lot of drinking is generational. They say that's a fact, but if you stop, I always consider it like a pie chart. If you imagine a pie chart and all of our reasons that we drink are on there, and 50% of that is generational, and 25% of that might be cultural, and then we've got another 10% of media and influence and all these other things that make up this pie chart, individual pie chart for all of us of why we drink. And if you take out 50% of that, when you get sober, you're taking out 50% of that chance of your kids drinking. They're always going to have that environmental and cultural and media and all of the other things that fill up the other half of the pie chart, trauma and all the other bits. But by not drinking, I think I'm taking out 50% chance of that generational drinking habits. And that's all I can give my children as a parent now is I didn't have a choice and perhaps they will. And I'm
Hmm.
not saying children won't drink. I think that would be a stupid thing for me to say. I have no idea what they will do. And I hope that they don't, of course, but I think that would be me being a bit silly. But what I am doing, and that's all any parent can do by stopping, is that you're giving your children a choice whether to or not.
Yes, and crowding out all like a lot, not crowding out, but kind of giving them a more balanced perspective on it. Have you
Yeah.
considered and like, do you talk to your kids about what you do? And Have you thought about when they come of, I'm sure you have, but what's your approach going to be when they do come of drinking age to talking to them about it?
It's really tough. I find it, that's one of the things I find really, really hard. Obviously, they know what I do. They know that my husband doesn't drink anymore either. He gave up drinking a few years ago. So we have an alcohol-free house. Um, I worry that that's going to cause them to drink secretly, of course.
Hmm.
Whereas probably growing up, I was a bit more open. I drank with my parents from the ages of probably 14 upwards. So I think maybe all I can offer is a safe environment for to drink if they want to at a certain age, and just be supportive of their choices and explain, they see what I watch and what I do, and I hope that they're absorbing, but honestly we'll have to have a conversation in 5 years' time and I can
Yeah.
report back what's happened.
Yeah.
I am not prepared. I am scared. I'm like any mother in these circumstances. There's a point now, my son's 13, my oldest, and there's a point where, you kind of lose control because they want to be more independent. And I have to trust that he's going to be able to work all that out on his own, and that what I have done will influence him in a positive way. But we'll have to wait and see. I can't predict the future, and I have to just hope for the best.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's great to just kind of, it's really refreshing for you to just admit, like I'm scared and
Yeah.
I'm just moving through the trenches with you all, because I've thought about that many times too. Like, how do I want to frame this in a way that's not like alcohol's the devil?
Yeah.
And, I want him to be like his own autonomous person while also, like, hopefully, just the lighthouse, not the tugboat, I guess, is
Yeah.
applicable here as well. So,
Totally. I think all I can just try and create is a sort of wholesome environment for them to be themselves, 100% themselves, whether, in the choices that they make, and keep the lines of communication open. I think that's all I can do. And yeah, let's chat in 5 years and we'll see
yeah,
whether any of it worked.
I
I think there's
know.
probably another book there in the teenage years. I'll have to think about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. You better keep going. These are good. I need
Oh, yeah.
more.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you so much for being here. I wanted you to share like everything you have, like where people can find you, what you have coming up, all of the
Yeah.
things.
Yeah, I'd love to. So my first book is called A Thousand Wasted Sundays. In America, you'll be able to get it on Spotify or ebook, or anywhere on Amazon. You can get the audiobook for Kindle and all that sort of thing. So you could get the hard copy from my website, which is soberawkward.com. But yeah, just get the audiobook or the ebook in America, because then you don't have to pay the fee, which I think the postage from Australia is about $30. I also have a community, an online community called Cuppa, CUPPA dot community. That's a free online service where we share all our events. There's sober people, sober curious people, drinkers, everyone chatting about their relationship with alcohol. There's a course that we sell, which is called The Guide, which you can find on the website, which is a 30-day guide to sobriety, which is a fantastic tool. It's videos of me and Hamish, who I do the podcast with, a day-to-day guide of how sobriety is going to feel, what you're going to be going through, and all of the tools that you need. Um, I think that's about it. And I have a new book coming out on the 29th of April in Australia, which is called Mumming, and it's a comedy memoir about trying and failing to be a better parent and just hoping that unconditional love is enough.
Oh, yes, I can't wait. I want a copy of that book.
Yeah,
I'm
don't
gonna
worry.
need,
I
I
think
need
one of
a
the lines
signed
in it,
copy.
I think the blurb on the back is "Come for the laughs, stay for the reassurance."
Oh,
Because
that's
it's
amazing.
like you saying we're all in the trenches together. I mean, I know a lot of mums that cry in car parks all over car parks all over Australia. It's to those mums that struggle, and the struggle being part of it and that being okay.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Well, thank you so much for being here, everyone. And on Instagram, you're drunk mummy, sober
Yeah, you
mum.
can go to the podcast is called Sober Awkward. You can find that on any podcast platform. You can either go to Drunk Mummy, Sober Mummy, which is my sort of personal blog, or at Sober Awkward, which is kind of our podcast blog on Instagram.
Amazing. Well, thanks for sharing all of your wisdom. I feel so grateful to have you here. I feel like we could have pulled an all-nighter talking
Yeah.
about all this stuff, but since we don't do cocaine anymore,
Yeah.
instead we go to bed at 8
God.
p.m.
Thank God we could just go on about our normal lives now instead of like having to like wake up not knowing who we are or where we are.
I know, right? Yes. So thanks everyone for tuning in. Go listen to Sober Awkward. Wait, stay tuned for the books and go follow Vic at Drunk Mummy, Sober Mummy on Instagram. Toodaloo.